Welcome back to another lesson with Mr. B. Today, we're going to learn about postcolonial theory, or the postcolonial lens. This lens sees colonialism as a powerful, usually destructive historical force that shapes not only the political futures of the countries involved, but also the identities of colonized and colonizing people. This lens or theory suggests that colonialism depends on a process of othering the colonized. Postcolonial theory attempts to understand the problem posed by European colonization and its aftermath. Thus, the idea of culture itself are entangled with discursive practices of the West. You can consider this lens to be an aspect of the historical lens that we just looked over, as it's looking at specific events and works influenced or inspired by colonization and its byproducts. Our country itself is a product of European colonialism. So one could also consider all of American literature and its genre in its entirety is post-colonial literature. But let's narrow it down so it's not too vague. Postcolonial theory specifically is looking at how colonization has become integrated or entangled in the culture of the colonized, and that this culture of the West, practices of the West, that Western culture has become a dominant influence over everybody. So let's think about how the US has had a grip on many countries in the East. It's a modern day empire. For example, let's think of the Philippines. The GIF that's playing in the back is some movie that was made about Ferdinand Magellan, quote unquote, discovering the Philippines in the same way that Christopher Columbus, quote unquote, discovered America. The Western occupation, like the Spanish or the US, that was held over the Philippine citizens for I forgot how many years, but a lot of years. Other quote unquote discursive practices of the West could be like skin whitening, if you've seen skin whitening products, or shedding darker skin within other cultures, or maybe unlearning a native language. For example, English is the second national language of the Philippines. So a lot of Western influence and I guess idolization of Western culture in colonized peoples and their descendants. Yeah, that's the correct word. They're descendants. Even here with indigenous Native Americans, right? How has their culture been erased over this span of supposed American literature? So postcolonial theory, it heavily relies on Edward Said's essay titled Orientalism, which exclaimed the construction of the Oriental or other by European discourses of knowledge. So basically saying that colonization depended on this process of othering another people. Edward Said's essay examines the Western European and soon to be United States dominance over any Eastern countries like Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. But with postcolonial theory, we can look at all the effects of colonization, like indigenous peoples of Australia, Pacific Islanders, Philippine Archipelago, South America, Spanish rule, wherever else. And that lens allows us to see colonialism as a powerful, destructive historical force that shapes the identities and the political future of the colonized. Kind of like those cultural practices of the West that I mentioned earlier, right? The after effects of colonization change the way that a people act, think, live, the way that they view their own culture, their native and mother culture. It changes over time because of the effects of colonization. So how can we use postcolonial theory to analyze a text or the world around us? Since the essay Orientalism, postcolonial theory and writing has become an attempt to intervene in the construction of culture and knowledge, and for intellectuals who come from post-colonial societies. So for post-colonial societies to quote unquote write their way back into history others have written, sounds familiar, right? It's kind of like the critical race or master and counter narratives, which have a big focus on looking at how history is written by the winners and how we can write our stories back into history, as what post-colonial theory is trying to hint at over here. Though it has similarities to other concepts we've learned, post-colonial theory asks specific questions such as, how are colonized people portrayed? Particularly, how are they shown as other? How is the process of colonization portrayed? How does the text deal with cultural conflicts that are portrayed? How does the text deal with cultural conflicts between the colonizing culture and the colonized or traditional culture? I hope that brings some clarity to the purpose and intention of the post-colonial lens, shining some light on the colonized as the quote-unquote other or as subjects. Because of this, literature or history written by the colonizers distorts the truth, and how we can use this to look at the way writers affected by colonialism are trying to give voice to the colonized, to write their stories back into the dominant master narrative. If you haven't already, make sure to complete the reading and respond to the question assignment on Google Classroom. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.